So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'd like you to close your eyes. Imagine you're holding a steaming cup of delicious aromatic coffee in your hands. You can feel the warmth in your fingers as you smell the tasty cup that awaits you. But then I wonder how many of you have ever thought about the journey of the coffee beans.
Speak into the mic.
Okay. So I just want you to imagine you're holding a steaming cup of delicious aromatic coffee in your hands. You can feel the warmth in your hands as you breathe in deeply and smell the tasty cup that awaits you. But then I wonder how many of you have ever thought about the journey of the coffee beans into your coffee cup? How many of you have ever thought about the people, the places, the processes that go into brewing this delicious cup of coffee? I also wonder how many of you know that coffee is a fruit. It belongs to a drupe family, and we drink the seed of that fruit. I also want you to understand that one of the important steps to make that delicious cup of coffee is the harvesting step. The harvesting of deep red sweet cherries. And who does this? It's the deft fingers of the women plantation workers. However, when we drink that delicious cup of coffee, either in the morning or in the 11s or in the evening, we often do not understand the role that women play in brewing that delicious cup of coffee. This evening, I'm going to outline the beans of wisdom that have guided me and continue to guide me in my life's journey with the coffee bean. Perhaps the best place to start with is my own story as a woman who completed her education in Madras in the year 1971, now known as Chennai, when I was planning, my career. I was very young, always being dogged by the fear of the unknown. Even when I was at the crossroads of selecting a career path, I was very nervous, very, very afraid. I was wondering, should I be a dietitian, or should I be a research scholar, or should I continue my studies, considering that I had completed my master's in food technology. My leaning was more towards being a dietitian, so I applied for a seat in many colleges, secured a seat in the New York Institute of Dietetics, secured a scholarship, waiting for the visa clearances, when I saw an advertisement in the newspaper. The newspaper, the announcement was for the post of director, for the post of assistant cup tasters at the coffee cupping laboratory at the Coffee Board of India. I think all of you know about tea tasting, but nobody had heard of coffee tasting. And this was the start of the entire role of coffee tasting in improving the quality of Indian coffee. So I applied for the post of assistant cup taster because they had called for a degree in master's in food technology, and I qualified for that. So I applied for it, and this was to change my entire future. I went for the interview, and when I went there, I found that I was the only woman in the room, surrounded by men who are highly qualified. All of them were doctorates, very confident individuals as they had experience on their hands. My initial reaction was one of fear. I would never get this job. But then I reassured myself I had something to fall back on. Even if I did not get this job, I could be a dietitian. So overcoming this syndrome of fear, I felt a sense of excitement. Well, I realized I had something to gain, nothing to lose, because this is the first interview that I was attending after finishing my studies. So I wrote the written test, topped it. I did the aptitude test. They checked my acuity of taste. I topped it again. And now I was no longer fearful. I was quite confident, so much so. I found that I was even gently, arguing with the interview panel, when the chairman of the panel said, I don't think we can give you this job, because this job entails a lot of training, and marriage will call for the resignation of the woman, and all this training would go awry, and there would be wasteful expenditure. I was a bit taken aback at this reply, and I sort of gently told him, "Sir, you should have mentioned in the newspaper that this post was reserved only for the male gender." Of course, being a governmental organization, they could not do that. Much to my surprise, I got the job. I was successful. But then I was very fortunate because the chairman of the coffee board at that time was a visionary, the late Sri H.G.V. Reddy, who said that gender should not come in the way of an appointment if the applicant has the necessary skills. The government should move and take the right step in the right direction. The success of securing this job left many footprints within myself. The most important was to understand that by overcoming fear of the unknown, one can be an achiever and be successful. My job at the board was not an easy task at all, because I was the first woman to enter the officers' cadre at the Coffee Board of India. I was young. I had no knowledge or experience on coffee. I did not know how to work with men who were much older than myself, who had definite ways of thinking and carrying out their items of work. I still remember the day at the board when the entire staff working under me protested and refused to accept my timeframes for work. Tears seemed to be the immediate solution, but later I realized this was the poorest of tools to tackle the situation. Fortunately, I had a chief, a senior IAS officer, who gave me appropriate advice at the appropriate time. He turned around to me and said, "First learn your subject, build your expertise, learn about your staff, understand your team, give them time to accept you, which will be based upon your knowledge base, your experience, your leadership style. Tread slowly but firmly." These words of advice have really guided me. The most important advice being knowledge is a very important tool to achieve success. It has served me well, and I continue to share this with other professional women. Comes the year 1974. Traveling down my coffee lane, I had to pay a visit, my first visit to a coffee plantation in the Nilgiris, a very small farm following the organic biodynamic principles of farming. It was surrounded by a forest which was filled with wild animals, including wild elephants. That was the first time that I saw harvesting of cherries, and I found that it was mainly done by women. They were standing the whole day, picking ripe red cherries, having a very positive attitude. They were smiling all the time, very selectively picking the ripe red cherries. And, I suddenly realized, okay, why not I volunteer? It seems a very easy task to carry out. So I volunteered that day. I said, I'm going to harvest cherries today. And I found that I was picking ripe cherries, overripe cherries, underripe cherries, overripe, overdried cherries, not understanding the rhythm, the pace, or the acumen with which you need to selectively pick these cherries. At one point of time, I saw a woman removing a tiny worm from her ankles. I looked down at the ground around me, and I found that we were standing on a bed of thousands of leeches, each one trying to latch onto my legs. I was petrified. I dropped my bag of cherries and ran out from the field as if my whole life depended on it. At that point of time, a group of male plantation workers came running out from an adjoining field, and they asked me, "Are you being chased by wild animals? Is it the wild elephants?" I stopped in my tracks, feeling so foolish. How could I tell them that I was petrified by a group of leeches who were trying to get their afternoon lunch from a fresh coffee picker? This episode left an indelible mark in my mind. It made me understand the difficulties and challenges that these women coffee plantation workers had to go through every day. It also made me understand that there's an important lesson to learn from this. The lesson being that when you're faced with any difficulties or challenges in life, when you're confronted with adverse conditions of work, you need to maintain a balance of mind. You need to be committed. You need to overcome fear. And most importantly, carry out the task that is before you with courage, with creativity, with integrity, with perseverance. And above all, with the will that there is no limit to what you can achieve, provided you focus on your strength and ability. And this lesson continues to be my guiding force in my journey with the coffee bean. Let me take you to another episode in my life. This was in the year 1976. I've even forgotten the years, it seems so long ago. I found that my career, I had to not only go to uncharted territory in India, but I also had to undergo international travel to understand, get myself trained in the sensory aspects of coffee. I mean, everyone thinks it's such an easy task. Just put a spoonful of the liquid, and then with gusto say, this is a plus coffee, this is a minus coffee. It doesn't work that way anyway. So I still, I can almost hear the announcement of the aircraft. I still remember the announcement of the aircraft, which said, announcing the departure of Swiss Air flight SR272 to Zurich. And all passengers are requested to take their, to board the aircraft at gate number 22. I still remember those numbers. I was absolutely, frightened. I was nervous. I was excited because I had never traveled outside India. And I was now going to the prestigious firm of Wolkarts in Winterthur to undergo training in the sensory analysis of coffee. But then I realized that if I had to pursue my career, I would have to be willing to take risks. I will have to overcome fear. I would have to pursue opportunities that would take me outside my comfort zone into new territory. I hardly slept that night on the flight. I was so worried that I would miss getting off the flight at Zurich, even though it was a non-stop direct flight. Such was my knowledge of air travel. My training at Wolkarts was very, very educative, very interesting. I was exposed to coffees from all over the world. I spent a length of time in Winterthur, and the training was carried out by two people. One was a Swiss-German elderly person, and the second was this assistant whom you see in this slide. This elderly gentleman, I later realized, didn't know a word of English. But when he heard that I was coming, he decided that he should learn the English language. So every night after he finished his work, he would have his dinner and rush across to the school to learn English. He spoke excellent English by the time I went to Winterthur. But what I understood from this was that where there is a will, there is a way. If you want to achieve something, you can do it. Age is no bar. This taught me another lesson. But when I looked around the tasting room and the trading room, I found there were no women. Was my career in coffee going to be a male-dominated one? How were I able to cope? Since I had led a very sheltered life, would I be able to survive? These were the thoughts that went through my mind. But then the coffee cups were so interesting. They were very, very educative, so I had to bury these thoughts. Then came the year 1977. I learned a very important lesson, that determination, fortitude, innovativeness can move mountains. Who taught me this? It was my attender, Raman Kuti, very bubbly individual, who attended to all our general chores at the lab. This was the coffee board. One day he decided that he would make some extra money by setting up a watermelon stall. But soon he found that the going was tough, because every nook and corner there was a watermelon stall, each one selling their wares at prices lower than the nearest competitor. He was a total failure until he hit upon a plan. He looked all around him and he found that there were diet versions of popular soft drinks. And it was obvious that people were buying them. So he said, why not I apply this magical word of diet to my watermelons? So he selected a prime spot in a main intersection in Bangalore and he put up a very interesting banner which read, Diet Watermelons, export quality, sugar-free, specially grown for figure-conscious ladies and diabetics, limited stock. At first, it was sheer curiosity which brought in customers, but later it swelled to large numbers and to repeatedly replenish this limited stock. Well, he was a great business success. He was interviewed by the local journalist, found himself being featured as a lead story in a reputed local newspaper. Such was his business acumen. He resigned his post with us, and he took his business acumen elsewhere. He graduated from an attender to a roadside hawker, finally to becoming a successful real estate owner. Today, he's no more, but he taught me very important beans of wisdom: determination, fortitude, innovativeness, ingenuity, hard work. All these can pay rich dividends. I come to the year 1978, 1st April 1978, I'll never forget that date. I took over as the head of the quality control department. Not that it came on a platter. It was not given to me on a platter. It was a very unwelcome gift to me, because I was going to be the first woman in the annals of coffee history in the Coffee Board of India to become the head of a department. The order came from the government of India, and they said the post which had been lying vacant, the director's post, that time it was called the head of quality control, which later got changed to director quality. And they said either you fill it up with an in-service person or you recruit an overseas specialist. Well, the coffee board decided to look around for an overseas specialist, found it was so expensive. Moreover, I had a lot of knowledge, a lot of training in sensory evaluation of coffees. I've been working with the farmers, and I knew the buyers. So they finally had to consider me, because it was such an expensive proposition to import an overseas specialist. So I had to go through a lot of written tests. I had to go through review performances, but finally they had to give me this post. Achieve I did. But I also realized that this was the beginning of a very, very difficult road. It's going to be very challenging. At the same time, it could be very rewarding, provided I worked for it. Well, at the board, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I was carrying out the sensory evaluation of coffee. I was looking at ways in which I could reward the coffee farmers based on the quality of the coffee. But then the coin of rewards had another side to it. The farmer didn't understand what sensory evaluation was. The remarks were, Mrs. Menon is in a good mood today. She's given me a plus. Today she's in a bad mood. She's given me a minus. But then I realized that I had to tread very gently, but with definitiveness. My only vision and aim was to wave the India coffee flag high up in the world skies, because India was known only for her teas and not for her coffee beans. Comes the year 1995. I reached the end of my scale as director quality. I was denied promotion because the entire industry was in a state of flux, because the market was being liberalized. We're moving in from marketing by government to marketing by the farmer himself. I was very upset, very angry, because I had set up the entire quality control division. I had trained so many officials, and here I was being denied promotion when I had years still to work. I had no ways of going up the ladder, nor any enhanced salary. My immediate reaction was, I think I should, take the legal step. But then I realized that it was a very extreme step, and I should take the next possible solution, and that was to resign from the board. I'm glad I resigned from the board, because Coffee Lab would never have been born if I did not take that decision. I always believe that things happen for a reason. Coffee Lab was born on 1st January 1996. The small farmers, the very many small farmers, quality-conscious farmers, wanted my help. They did not know how to process their coffee. They did not know how to market their coffees. They wanted me to guide them. So I set up all the procedures, and I was really, enthusiastically working. The year 1997, prices shot through the roof. And the farmers started remarking, the large farmers, Mrs. Menon, I can put sticks and stones in my bag of coffee and get paid for it. Did you do a wise thing in setting up this lab? My initial reaction was one of fear, one of anxiety, one of stress. Had I done a wrong thing in setting up the lab? My whole focus on, how I plan, how to work in the lab was crumbling. I then remembered the words of my yoga teacher. I used to learn yoga at one point of time. And the yoga teacher turned around to me. I'll still remember her words. She said, when you want to handle stress, you must balance your mind and spirit. To do that, sit in a quiet room. Close your eyes. Sip from a tall glass of warm water and allow your mind to dwell on things of beauty. It worked for me that day, that year. Even today, when I'm very worried, this comes to my rescue. Well, the year 2023. A lot of coffee has flown under the bridge, 50 years, and I've enjoyed every bit of my work. Enjoyed working with the farmers, developing their brands, enjoyed working with the cafe owners, providing them with blends, checking the quality of the coffee that they serve, helping entrepreneurs to set up coffee businesses, certifying coffees for export, teaching farmers in India, overseas, teaching students from around the world in the master's course in Italy. The list is endless. Ensuring that the candle of quality burns brightly from harvesting to that delicious cup that you're holding in your hands. It's been a very flowing journey, a journey which has been frustrating, knowledge acquiring. It has been creative, aromatic, at the same time a mind-boggling experience. The women that I met in the coffee plantations, the men and women whom I met in the coffee cafes, the coffee farmers, my family, and the people whom I met in the coffee industry have not only helped me in my coffee career, teaching me the coffee principles, but they also taught me that life should be accepted in all its fullness, and that when you accept life in all its fullness, you must understand that strength and success do not come from a physical capacity. It comes from an indomitable will, the will and the strength to move forward, the will to survive, the will and the courage to change the things that you can, and the will and the wisdom to know the things that you cannot change. I now want you to drink that delicious cup of aromatic coffee in your hands. It will not only energize you, but it will also revitalize you and help you to understand, recognize, and implement what one of my favorites, Walt Disney, said. All of our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you, Sunalini. That was wonderful. I'm an avid lover of coffee, and I really imagined myself having that cup of it. Before I start, I want to call out somebody in this audience who has been a role model for me as I grew up. She's sitting there in a corner, Mrs. Padma Ramachandran, IAS officer, former chief secretary. Both her and her husband were my dad's chief secretaries, and somebody who has broken so many glass barriers and helped us all to stand, because we stand here today because we stand on the shoulders of people like her and what she taught us. Growing up, she was truly my role model, and I'm really, really, really thankful and privileged that she's here today. Thank you, Padmati. My story is going to be similar, but a little different. I will talk a little bit about the gender journey that I went through, but more importantly, having been a HR person and a HR professional in organizations, I want to also talk about what organizations, whether they are NGOs, whether they are private, whether they are institutions, need to do to address this whole issue of diversity and inclusion, and what individuals, whether they are your daughters, your sisters, your grandchildren, granddaughters need to do to make a mark as women in careers. So I want to go back to 1983. As a young management trainee, I joined a very male-dominated company, Myco Bosch. At lunch, I was assigned a mentor who was to escort me and the other two management trainees to the canteen for lunch. We walked into this big cavern of a canteen. I realized later it was one of the biggest departments in the company. And there was a small management and superintending staff enclosure where we were allowed to eat. But as we entered, my mentor said, he showed me a small room, a small enclosure on the right. And he said, Hema, you can eat here. So I said, what is that? He said, that's the women's enclosure. So I said, wait a minute. Am I not an M&SS? Can I not eat there? He shrugged. He said, well, all women eat there. I thought for a moment. And then I said, no, this is not going to happen. I'm going to work with all these men through the rest of the day, and at lunch go into this little enclosure. So I daintily marched ahead, all 5'1" of me, and you could literally hear spoons drop, silence. I later took mentorship to heart and married that mentor. And it's been a long partnership, and he stayed my mentor through life. So like my daughter says, Ma, there were some other collateral benefits of your going beyond the women's enclosure. So that was my personal journey. In 2003, I was privileged to lead for CII, the first inclusivity and diversity conference that India held for the private sector. It was a 3-day event, and we had some wonderful speakers like Naina Lal Kidwai, the late Mr. Vikram Kirloskar, and so many others. But we talked about diversity in a very holistic sense, not just gender, which we're talking about today, but also diversity of specially abled, supplier diversity, mergers and acquisitions diversity, and a whole slew of things. And that opened my eyes to another dimension. And we had the head of the Philips Innovation Center, an Indophile, and a very, very passionate diversity champion, telling that he looked up the word inclusion and he defined it as anything solid, gaseous, or liquid that was enclosed in another object. 20 years hence, inclusion is quite well understood as really what we are talking about today.
Because finally, diversity is a statistic. It is something that is static. What makes a company or an organization succeed is the whole concept of inclusivity. And it is that mindset which actually encourages people to bring their differences to the workplace because they are celebrated. And therefore, they bring more of themselves to the workplace. And we end up with the virtuous circle of productivity. But why diversity? Is it just a nice-to-do thing? Is it a business-as-usual thing? Why would we all struggle to find ourselves as minorities trying to do something? As organizations, there's very, very strong business benefits for embracing diversity, especially gender diversity. There is the war for talent, and you get 50% of the talent pool immediately. So that is the first thing. The second is that when you have a diverse group, you create an atmosphere which is much more adaptable, flexible, open to change, as I have seen. And in today's world where we have to continuously live in a beta mode, this is very, very important. In fact, two professors, one from Michigan and one from Loyola, Chicago, spoke about what they call the diversity prediction theorem, which means the ability of any group is equal to the average ability of that group plus the diversity of the group. And this, I think, is a key business benefit. Cut to another very much more important business benefit. You start mirroring the kind of customer you're catering to. There are many, many examples where companies now employ people to shape and who actually mirror the demographic of their customer base. And now, with the latest ESG kind of regulations, proxy advisory firms are actually looking at companies and are saying on the governance mechanism, how many women do you have? On the boards, how many women do you have? And you may say, what does a proxy advisories matter to me? The FIIs look at it. And the FIIs are carrying money from some of the largest funds all over the world. So there is a very strong, so CEOs are going ahead and embracing diversity, and that gender diversity especially, and that's a very, very good thing for all of us. So there's a financial angle, a marketing angle, and of course, a social citizenry angle. How should managements, because I have sat a lot on the management side, how should managements look at diversity programs? I think it's one of the most complex change management programs, and it should be looked at like that, because the battle is finally between the ears. It is a perception battle. It is unconscious biases, like Sunalini said. It is what you have to find out from data. It's a very interesting example. The Big Four, one of the Big Four, were recruiting equal number of men and women. But when it came time to partner selection, they found the numbers to be 1:3. That means for every one woman, they were getting 3 partner candidates from men. So they said, what happened? They thought it must be the 3M, maternity, mobility, and of course, marriage. But it was not that. It was when they delved into data, they found it was the kind of projects women were being allocated to. Men were being given the sunrise industries. Women were getting the traditional industries. And there were enough partners in the traditional industries, not enough in the sunrise industries. So the problem and a symptom were quite different. And that's where data is important. So organizations have to delve into data and be fanatic about analyzing data. Second, size matters. There is a tipping point. I sit on some boards now, and I find as a token single woman, the pressures on you to be that diversity candidate and to be yourself, or that virtuous circle of productivity, is much more than when there are more. I think the tipping point is 20 to 30%. If you have a good 20 to 30% mix, and one act by the Companies Act 2013, I'm not a big one for quotas. In fact, Viju asked me, do you believe in quotas? I'm not a big one for quotas. In fact, I was quite appalled when that happened. But because that one act where Companies Act said you must have at least one woman in the board, the number of women in the board increased from 5% in 2014 to close to 18% now. And globally, it's about 20%. So we are almost there. Now, then you can debate what kind of women, how many women, all of those. ESG companies are actually insisting on 2 women in the board. And of course, India has progressed quite a bit. Even in the other levels, you find now numbers like 40, 30, 20. But you see a big dip in India in mid-career, much more than the other Southeast Asian countries. I'm not able to quite reason why. It could be many reasons. I have some conjectures. One, after some time, women say, to hell with politics. I'll do something on my own. And they move out of the corporate rat race. Second, my parents have done so much for me. I need to be there for them now. Let me be more flexible. Elder care is not very institutionalized in India. And third, the board exam syndrome, the motherly guilt pangs. Should I not be there for that 10th and 12th standard exam for my child? So these are issues, but as companies are grappling and realizing, they are working towards it. But the point is, size matters. Critical mass matters. The second is, companies and individuals take their cue from the corner office. If the leader does not embrace inclusivity, if he is not in sync, acting and doing what he's speaking about, organizations are very fast to pick the cue. And I think that's, for example, sexual harassment. We now have a law, but if you say, oh, my HR department handles it, it doesn't happen in my company. Somebody else is there. If those messages come from the corner office, if he or she does not see the leader practicing complete equality even at home, the culture is very difficult to embrace. Third, middle manager, first line manager sensitization is critical, especially for issues like this. Assume a lady is pregnant. She's done terrific work the last 2 years. Her ratings are superlative. But now you know she's going to be off on leave for 3 to 6 months and may not even come back. If you have a bell curve into which you have to put your employees in their appraisal ratings, there is a strong temptation to give her an average. Now, what does that do? If she is going to negotiate after her childbirth and, if she comes back to your firm or another, her pay is going to be less than what her peers was. And that's where we end up with issues like pay parity issues. So organizations have to have systems and processes. Like the average of the last 2 years will be by default this year's rating. Because it's only systems and processes which finally change behavior and culture. Behavior and culture don't change by serendipity. So managers have to be sensitized on trainings like this. Similarly, today I was in another session talking to a corporate audience, and they talked about not really harassment, but a sense of feeling overpowered, overwhelmed by the number of men and the aggression that comes up. Some of these issues we need to tackle and address. So that's on the organizational side. You need sensitization, you need capability builders, you need policies and procedures, flex work, etc., and of course, leadership by example. What do individuals need to do? I think individual women also have some things to do. First of all, I like to look at it as competence. And competence has attitude, has skills, and knowledge. Like Sunalini said, finally it's in the attitude. You must have that burning desire to go out there and succeed. I was similarly like the singer said about this girl getting up in the morning, doing all the household work, then doing her riyaz, and then singing. I was at Hosur the other day speaking to some women. They get up at 3:30 or 4 a.m., finish all their housework, and then reach the factory. work through for the next 8 hours, go back and take care of dinner and the homework. But there is a strong desire. I'm not for a moment saying that that's right. In fact, I have a very dear friend who kept getting calls from her son's school saying, your son is not doing this and your son is not doing that. So she turned around and said, see, this is my husband's phone number. 50% of the time you call him. 50% you call me. So I'm a big believer that it should be a 50%. But in any case, I think the attitude is important. Energy is important. Energy. I really envy those people who can sleep 4 to 6 hours and run the whole day, because you get those extra hours to do all of those. Third, you must be able to let go. Many women want to be this, there's a famous Sanskrit poem that, you must be Karyeshu Dasi, Rupeshu Lakshmi, something else, something. So you want to be the best of everything. You cannot. Marshall Goldsmith is a famous coach. He's a Buddhist too. And when he does his workshops, after the workshops, he asks the women to wait. And he says, I have something to tell you. And he talks about this example. He says, imagine it's a Sunday afternoon. The lady of the house has done everything that's required. She's done the shopping, she's done the cleaning, she's even cooked for the week ahead. She's taped her favorite soap operas, and she's now watching them in the living room. Living room is in a mess. And she says, after watching this, I'll clean up the living room also. Her mother-in-law walks in and says, what a mess, let me clean up this place. The lady is on the defensive. She gets very upset. She said, no, I'll do that. She offs her TV. Her weekend and her whole week is spoiled. He says, cut. Imagine if it's the man. He's had a busy weekend too. He's mowed the lawn. He's played some rounds of golf. And now it's Sunday afternoon and he's having beer and watching soccer. His mother-in-law walks in. The room is a mess. She says, let me help. I have to clean this up. He says, go right ahead, Mom. So the issue is that we should delegate. We should learn to lean on whoever we can. Ladies should use whatever infrastructure is possible, because you cannot be everywhere at the same place. So that's the attitude piece. Second is the skill. The skill piece is speaking up. But before you speak up, you need to shape your thoughts. You need to articulate. Many times women tend to speak without having shaped their thoughts. A good tip is actually to plan what you will make as your participation that day, think it through, and then speak. Second, you have to be assertive. Now, the flip to it is the male comeback to it is that she's too aggressive. Don't fall for it. Continue to be assertive. It is very important. In fact, when I coach women, I now find I don't work on their development needs. I only work on their strengths. It's like the Pygmalion effect. Because sometimes they are so worried that are they being too aggressive, too ambitious, because you sell yourself very short. You want to seem, so don't have the imposter syndrome, is what I tell my youngsters. And the third, of course, networking skills. It is very, very important to have networking skills. Women tend to do their work, but they don't network. They don't know beyond. And when you have to talk to superiors, they also want you to tell about what's happening in other industries. And when you network, you get other job opportunities, which means your marketability goes up, which means the company pays you more. So it's a circle again. So networking is they find time to go to the beauty parlor. Then why not for professional organizations and professional networking? Finally, of course, knowledge. I think you have to be, like Sunalini said, right on top. You cannot play the gender card and hope to just progress. So I think K, S, and A, all the three are important. In the words of Lalita Sahasranamam, I like to quote it like this: Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti. If you have the desire, if you have the knowledge, and if you have, finally, the energy, success is yours. But one thing, no change program can be done without involving the majority. So women cannot just sit in a room and try to change the world without involving the majority. That is a big thing that both women should learn and management should learn. I remember we had a session on networking in a program which we used to run at Infosys called iWin, Infosys Women's Inclusivity Network. And leading that session on networking was our ultimate networker, Nandan Nilekani. So the room was jam-packed with women. But also many men wanted to get in because, learning networking from Nandan, there's nothing like that. So I told one of them, unfortunately, this is only an I win session. And he told me, Hema, you have your I win, but ultimately we win. That's when I learned that there's no point doing anything exclusive for the minority. You have to enlist and champion and crusade with the majority to make this a success. Then, of course, the women will find it a great place to work in. They'll bring more of themselves to the workplace. And hey presto, investors, customers, and employees will flock to your organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Such wonderful talks that there's very little left to we have about 40 minutes left in the session. I'll start with a few questions and then throw it open to all of you to chat with our speakers, okay? So let me start with you, Hema. You said that you don't believe in quotas, and that's fair. And nevertheless, this one director's quota coming legally has increased the numbers. How else do you think we can do, what can we achieve? So for example, one thing is at director level, but don't you think it has to start right from the beginning and at all levels? Like you mentioned in one of the big four, it was the projects issue. But in other companies, one doesn't know. There are many reasons why people drop out. So at every level, do you see some value in ensuring that there are women, for example, in, at least some women are forcibly taken into the recruitment group, as an example, and things like that? Or internal promotions, do you want quotas and so on?
Is my mic on? Yeah. So, let me just take the engineering schools now. If you take the tier 1 engineering schools, I think the percentages are still a little iffy. But if I go to tier 2 and tier 3 engineering schools, the number of women is very, very high. For various reasons, women are not really encouraged to train to app. For example, a mother will take her son to Kota, stay with him for 2 years, teach him how to crack an IIT exam, and then get him into the IIT. But they won't do that for the women. So the women will not be sent for tuition because of safety, this, that, etc. So many of them tend to stay in tier 2, tier 3. So if you're going to tier 2, tier 3 colleges, the sheer percentage of women will ensure that you have a good percentage of women coming into the workplace. Now, while I'm not at all for quotas, but I did see the success of what happened. At the board level, I find many of them brought their spouses along as the plus one lady. Now, there was a lot of furor around that, about whether a spouse should become the lady director. But when you look at 75% of the organizations listed on BSE or NSE, they are finally family-managed companies. And from a sheer corporate governance and succession planning perspective, you want somebody to be able to carry the baton. And it's good if she's also in the boardroom. At the next level, the top level, which we were very poor at, in fact, the board had increased compared to the C-suite or next to the MD. It has improved now considerably, not because of quotas, but because ESG is putting pressure, saying, how does your senior management leadership group? In the IT industry, which Bangalore is very, very famous for, customers, many of the CIOs are women. And when they come with their team, they say, gosh, the people we are negotiating with don't look like us at all. There's no demographic semblance. So then there is a request. Middle management, there's always this issue, as I said, there is a mortality, so organizations have to work around it. There can be many things. It's these subtle biases. I remember once a lady got the highest rating from the customer, but she worked from home that whole year because her husband was very ill. But when it came time for promotion, the management said, no, she's not come to work. She's only worked from home. She's ineligible. Her boss resigned, which was a very strong message. But these biases do exist, and these have to be picked up and addressed and handled. So my view is have quotas for the number of candidates you bring in. There's a very famous, Olivier Bloom was the head of Schneider Electric in India. And his mandate was, I want 3 ladies out of my 10 directs, 3 to be ladies. So you got a HR head. He got the finance head who was a woman. And then he wanted an industrial saleswoman. That he was finding very tough. So he had only one request. He said, if the funnel converts 1:10 for a man, that is for every 10 biodatas you can make one offer, and if the women it's 20:1, then give me 20 resumes. So he gave a mandate to the headhunters that give me more resumes. I need on the slew of the final shortlist at least 2 women candidates. And he said, if you bring in a woman, I will pay you more retainer fee. So you see, there are methods by which you should not compromise merit, but the pipeline you can increase. And that's what I believe in.
One follow-up to that. You mentioned, some of the reasons why women drop out during the career. One being children. I mean, 8th, 10th standard or whatever the thing is. But it could also be, childcare when they're younger, elderly care, etc. So do you see, I don't see it happening legally or statutorily that the government is going to provide it, but should large companies and organizations provide compulsorily childcare, maybe parent care at some stage, etc.?
See,
as a means of increasing gender diversity.
No, I agree. But I think all good, mature, progressive organizations will provide childcare in some form or the other. The issue is, where do you provide childcare? See, in a plantation, you're staying there, and then you're working there, you're able to go and feed, etc. So it's there. But in a place like Bangalore, if you're having people traveling from Whitefield to Electronic City for work, to take a little baby from Whitefield to Electronic City by bus or even by car is criminal. So organizations will have to, and I believe that's the continuing model, that's a successful model, to find good certified childcare agencies in local neighborhoods, which people can then send their child to. So mother drops, father picks up, or grandmother drops, mother picks up, whatever it is. You cannot have them climbing these buses and climbing these cars and all that and taking them all over the place. So that will not. Elder care, similarly. But in India, elder care, there is a stigma still. You don't send your elders out, so to say. And are you going to send them somewhere in the morning and bring them back in the evening? Actually, I find it is the well-to-do, or if you take the income pyramid, more the higher income groups where the women drop out. The middle class, where you really need both incomes working, they somehow find the thing, they find an attender, they find somebody else in the family to provide that care. But at the higher levels, so elder care is a greater issue because there's a stigma attached to it. I don't know. But childcare, I'm very much for empaneling and creating creches where people, depending on where they stay, can drop off the child rather than carry the child.
Thank you. Sunalini, you've now been running your own lab for 30 plus years, right? So tell us, you mentioned briefly about the changes happening when the coffee board was losing its monopoly and then you set up and so on. So by setting up this lab and in a sense providing an alternative professional service to improving quality, tell us something about how that has impacted the whole coffee industry in India How have we changed from being more a commodity-oriented country to creating premium coffees, marketing them well, bringing in the Illy cafes and so on? Listen.
Thank you. Well, you asked me a question about Coffee Lab, and I think that's a very interesting question that you asked me. Because when I, took over or set up Coffee Lab, I took it over at a time when the market was in a state of flux. The farmers didn't really know how to handle quality, how to process their coffee, how to market their coffee, because the coffee board was doing everything. When I was there in the board, I used to manage the quality evaluation, we used to manage the marketing, make sure the returns went back to the farmers. But when it got liberalized, the farmers just didn't know how to handle it. So at the Coffee Lab, we started this journey with the farmers. It was a tough journey because every time I said, your coffee is bad, the immediate reaction was, I think you don't know your subject. You're just doing something, like sensory evaluation, and you really don't understand. I still remember, a farmer, very well-known farmer in Yerkod, very well-known. His coffee was said to be excellent. But every time I cupped his coffee, I was getting an earthy note. It's just like mud in the coffee. So, I kept sending him reports saying the coffee is bad. And he kept replying to me, I think you don't know your job. You better close Coffee Lab. So one day I decided, let me now take this challenge. And I said, can I come and visit your farm? He said, sure thing. I think you don't know your subject. You better come and learn from me. So I said, okay, let me go. I went to the farm. It was a beautiful farm. Everything was perfect. He had a good processing unit. He had all, patios. We need to dry our coffee. That's a very important aspect for quality, is to dry the coffee. Make sure, because the shelf life depends entirely on how you dry the coffee, because you're handling green beans and not a roasted bean. So I saw everything, and as everything was perfect, I thought to myself, gosh, I think I don't know my subject. I better just vamoose from the coffee arena. And then, it was very strange. I always say God is above. I always say, Hema, that God somehow guides the woman. I don't know whether the man is guided. Perhaps he is, because he's very strong. So I sort of was standing there, and then I said, can I look at your coffee beans in your storehouse? He said, sure thing, you can see it, because no drying was taking place on that particular day. I touched the parchment covers. The coffee has got a cover around it, the parchment cover. And I could feel a little bit of, grit on it, a little sort of looked like a little bit of sand on it. I get clean beans for evaluation, so I never see the outside parchment cover. So I said, can I see your water source? Can I see your water? He said, I use clean water. I said, no, can I just see it? He said, you have to walk quite a bit, you've got to, it's spring water, it's clean water, you've got to climb quite a distance. I said, I'll climb any number of miles. I thought to myself, I have to prove to him that maybe I was right and he was wrong. I still had to use the word maybe. So we went to the water source, and I found that the water was having fine silt on it. Coffee is very, very sensitive. You never realize you're handling a living bean, a green bean. It's emotes like you and me. It has feelings. And I always tell the farmer, when you're sweating, your coffee is also sweating. So I came back and told him, it's the water source which is causing this problem. And it was quite a turning point, because he was a leader in his area. So the word went round that I wasn't such a fool. I did know my subject. So that was one very important lesson that I learned, is I had to tread gently. I had to listen very carefully to his woes. I had to sort of literally walk in a maze, but gently maneuver the maze in order to get the work done. So I think Coffee Lab came into play, and what we did was, I used to attend most of the fairs. Even today, I attend international events for the simple reason I want to wave the India flag. Nobody knows Indian coffee. Today, they know. But when I started my journey, they used to call it a trash coffee. It's a poor filler coffee. I still remember when I was putting up the stall in the coffee board, when I was working in coffee board, I was putting up a stall in one of the fairs. I think that was in Anaheim. And those days, foreign exchange was so limited that, I was the only woman sent. And I was putting up this stall, and I saw a whole group of very, well-known professionals in the coffee fraternity, the coffee world, walking and saying, Coffee Board of India? What trash coffee India has. And they just walked past. And I made up my mind that day that one day I'll make sure that they come back to me and ask me for coffee, and I would say, sorry, I'm sold out. Well, we were almost reached there. I still have a little bit of a journey to do. But I think today coffee is recognized. And what did we do in the lab? We started analyzing the coffees, working with the farmers, building their brands. In fact, my first brand was Buttercup Bold, a Robusta coffee, which is considered a poor cousin of Arabica. But actually, it's a beautiful bean. It has its own characteristics, just like basmati rice and Jeeraga Sambar rice. I mean, both are beautiful rice, but you can't compare one with the other. So I still remember this, the Robusta bean that I was, trying to develop for this farmer. How did I develop this? It was sheer fate, I think. Here was this, I went to visit this farm because I tasted this coffee. It was given to me, and I tasted and said, gosh, this is beautiful. This has got lovely notes in it. I want to see the farm. So the person who brought the sample of coffee happened to be one of the facilitators for coffee sale. He said, okay, come along, let's go. I went to the chairperson, and that was on the coffee board then. And I said, sir, can I visit this farm? He said, sure, go ahead, take the card. I was quite surprised. I got the card, never given. I went to the farm, and he was not there. I went around the entire farm, and then the farmer arrived, and he was very angry. He said, how can you enter my farm without my permission? So I decided to vamoose. His wife was so hospitable. She said, no, you must have lunch and then go. So anyway, I ate lunch. I couldn't swallow it, but I had to eat the lunch. Came back, and a few weeks later, this gentleman walked into my lab. And then he said, you talk so much about my coffee. Give me a brand name for it. I was thinking, how can you just give a brand name like that? Again, whispered to God, please help me. The coffee was very buttery in the cup. The beans were very bold. So I said, Buttercup Bold. I don't know how it came. And buttercup is a beautiful flower. So that was my first brand when I was leaving the board. So I decided to develop on that. And I've built many brands. Veeratikan is another brand of mine, named after Veerappan, from the Biligiri Rangan Hills. It has a beautiful story, beautiful cups. And I just said Veer for valiant, for Vijay, and the brand became Veeratikan. So Coffee Lab has developed many brands for farmers. I certify coffees for Really Cafe. I've been doing it for the past 25 years. And I still remember the first time when I used to send coffees which were approved by the lab, they would reject it, saying, it's not correct. It took me a long time, but I learned it. And today, my evaluations are accepted by them. So Coffee Lab has done quite a bit that way, I think, to wave the India flag. Today, when you go to the various fairs, people recognize the cup, they recognize the coffee, they're willing to pay a premium for it. I always invite the farmers, the buyers to come to India. We had a 7-bean trail recently organized by the lab where we took the buyers to the different farms and explained to them what we did. We have cupping sessions all the time for these buyers and for the farmers. So I think Coffee Lab has helped in a small way, I would say, in improving the quality of India and moving it up the value chain.
Do you see the opportunity to build new kinds of coffees or from new areas? I know that you're doing something and people have been talking about Araku Valley and so on. But like that, are there new areas where coffee can get grown and build different, different styles, different things based on the climate and the terroir there?
Yes, I've started working with the non-traditional coffee growing zone of Odisha as they call it. And this is for a governmental body. And I was just wondering how this coffee would taste. But it's a lot of tribal farmers just like Araku. And these are tribal farmers, who don't know much about coffee, but they grow this, it's an added income for them. So I was asked to help these tribal farmers. So I went across to Odisha. I went to Koraput. That's where, you have the centers and you have many farms adjoining it. So these were tribal farmers. And I started evaluating their coffees, realizing that there was potential. because you always believe that coffee can grow only in a traditional zone. But, it can also grow in non-traditional zones. Andhra Pradesh, Araku is a non-traditional zone. So I took courage from that to say, I'm sure the coffee here would also do well. So I took the beans. I found it was a particular varietal, a very specific varietal, which grows in this region excellently, which doesn't grow in the traditional zones. So I zoomed in on that. And then I started saying, can you send me farm-wise? And I started evaluating farm-wise. Certain farms did very well. Certain farms, they didn't know how to handle it. So we taught them, we gave them a lot of training programs. And then they told me, can we make a blend? So I said, why not? Let's make a blend. Because Odisha, they don't drink coffee. So I said, okay, let me make a blend. And the chief there was an IAS officer lady again. So she understood. It was very easy for me to communicate with her, saying, this has got potential, this does not have potential. And she took all my suggestions in a very positive way. So she said, okay, let's make this. And she said, I'm calling it Tiger Bright. And, she took the artwork from Orissa, their beautiful gaunt paintings. And she had a very nice painting done. She went to the UK and, she had a friend there and they designed it. And she called it Tiger Bright. And she said, I want a nice coffee for it. So I said, okay, let me make a nice coffee. I said, it should be bright in the cup to highlight the Tiger Bright. So we made the blend. We worked on it for about 3 weeks. We got coffees from Odisha, from different nook and corner. And in coffee, we have different methods of processing. We have a washed coffee, we have a natural coffee, we have a honey coffee. You would think coffee is just beans. But, you can do so many things with it today. You can do so many different methods of processing to highlight different flavor notes, just like wine. In fact, I think we took a lot of our vocabulary from wine. So I made this blend, and then I trained that, they are official in coffee roasting. And we launched it. And now when I call them up, he says, ma'am, it sells like hotcakes. And the coffee is doing very well. So we have another blend coming up, which I think will be released shortly, called Flying Fish. And this is a coffee which is dark roasted because I feel that it comes from the depths of the deep sea, the flying fish. So this is another blend. So we have been working in non-traditional areas. Northeast is another area. Meghalaya is another area we've started working with. The sky is the limit for coffee. It's a beautiful journey, and I think it's very, very stimulating. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. One last question. Hema, what do you see the impact of working from home in sharing loads between woman and man, and therefore keeping women in the workplace, maybe helping their careers? Do you think this whole working from home is going to make a big difference?
Yes and no. Yes, because if you have a true partnership, then it is possible for you to really balance and spend time at home working, while at the same time looking after, whatever the family needs. But it has to be a true partnership. But what I'm finding, especially in industries like the software industry, families have actually locked up their houses here in metros and gone to their original homes and villages and small tier towns, where many of them are staying in joint families, where there is a huge cultural mismatch. There it is becoming very, very tough, because the expectation is that the lady will be the homemaker, but at the same time so with people coming back, and now gender-neutral policies coming, where it's not whether you're a man or a woman, you can work from home, and companies which had 10% of their population working from home could easily move to 90-95%, just because of the infrastructure that was there in place for that 10%. Appreciating the fact that it is good to have it. If that education is given, and that the fact that you have to come to work on some days, so you're coming back, it will help. But in a model where it is totally work from home. And I think, especially for the industry that we are in, the IT industry in Bangalore, this recession or slowing down or whatever is really a wake-up call. Because everybody, people would say that they can't come to work. They are scared of it. But you go to Iron Man or Iron Hill on Bellandur Road, the pub, and it's chock-a-block. Most of them IT professionals during the day. So they can go to the pub, but they won't come to work. So now when everything is getting a little tightened and companies are saying, okay, the bottom 5% is going to walk home, etc., people are appearing back, and then the genuine cases will really float up. So it's a good thing, but one has to balance the aspirations.
Let's open to questions from the audience. Anyone has a question for our, please. Sorry, Sandhya, do you need them to come up or anything? No.
Namaste. Namaste, madam. My madam is. Should I ask simultaneously or one by one? I will ask first. I work in the space of active mobility, which is promoting with Ravichandar. It's promoting walking same way for the last 10 years. I am trying to promote cycling actually. So one of the things that we figured out is not many women cycle. So the way we have designed our cities itself, because we've been studying the women using public transport, almost 60% beneficiary are women, like the garment workers and all. But if you look at the policy, it is very elite public transport, where public transport we have totally ignored on the needs of the transport for the woman, right? And also the other aspect is going in this traffic, it affects the health, both mental, physical and spiritual health, with no space for our nature green, right? So we are trying to work. So how do you think the industry, because the one director is that the woman as a leader, okay, how can she kind of push for a more accommodative transport, urban planning, and all these things included with the wellness of the woman, the mobility of the woman, and also the workplace access of it? How do you think the industry should take forward?
So I don't think I'm looking at it gender neutrally, because I think the same things apply to men as well. So there are some organizations, I don't want to name them, but they have 3-4 facilities in a city like Bangalore, and they're consciously trying to map to see whether they can have people based in locations which are proximate to residences. Okay? So if you're in Whitefield facility, then can you have people from this area in that facility? Okay? And if you are in the Manyata Tech Park kind of areas, then can you have people from that? So they were consciously trying that. However, there are 2 issues. One is people, of course, change locations, and projects also have to change, because, that's the whole way some of these models work. And the third thing is that clients sometimes want dedicated centers in a particular place. So that's for the IT. Now, if you look at non-IT, for example, if I looked at something like Bosch, or if I looked at L&T, or the ITC factories, which is a green factory, traditionally, when I came in 83, I was in Bosch. It was a manufacturing setup. We had very strong unions. We had a very strong union, and we knew we had a big lockdown, and we used to all go with police escort to work, because otherwise we could get beaten up. But traditionally, people stayed in that Wilson Garden, etc., etc. But then the factory itself moved to Bidadi. Then what happens? You have your house in Lalji Nagar. You have your house in... So in the old public sector system, it was really walk to work. You had your school there. You had your hospital there. All of them, HAL, ITI, BEML, you name it. But in the private sector, they depend on the government. And therefore, it is not... The second thing that you say is that if women did cycle, and even if you ask them to walk, even the safety angle is something that companies have to be very, very cautious about. They'll have to provide the last mile, especially in the office, and the reverse, because we've seen such horrific cases, and then it becomes. So I think more than anything, the safety. There is, of course, footpaths and cycle tracks and all of those things. But the safety angle is something that companies would be very, very wary of. So these are the two pros and cons. That's why companies have invested overly in public transport. And for some, that's itself a problem, because that congests the whole SRS buses all over the place. 6:30, I used to get up and get into that bus and go all the way to Electronic City. But that's the way they were trying to solve it, because there was no other way to do it. But cycling is tough. Though I know one CEO of a very, very admired company who cycles all the way, and you probably know him. I'm not going to name him. Yeah. He cycles all the way from Indranagar to Electronic City. But I'm worried as the nomination and REM committee chair, saying, Venkat, look after yourself, you know. So.
Other questions?
Hi. First of all, I'm so glad that I'm here. The reason I am from a HR fraternity, I work as a talent acquisition professional, so I can relate to most of the things that you have said. And also, I'm a aspirational wannabe a cafe owner in future, maybe. So I'm really, really glad that I'm here. I have many takeaways from this session. One question that I would like to ask you, Hema ma'am, is that I want to know what are the major cultural differences that you have seen as you have progressed. Because I could relate to diversity challenges, in an organization. When I'm hiring, I want to make sure that I bring a lot of women. And I work for a startup where 95% of the professionals are men when I started. And we have brought up to 30% of the diversity mix. Again, be it gender diversity or any other diversity areas. But I would like to know what are the major cultural differences that you have seen from as you have progressed in your career?
See, there are two types. One is, I think, the sky is the limit. So, in my time, if I did a BA, and if I hadn't done my master's, I would have had to apply for a clerical job. Today, unless I got an MBA. So if I did the MBA, it changed. So I think today the job opportunities culturally has opened, and women have just embraced it. And they're willing to work extra hours or years before the master's. So push back the marriage, push back the settling down, all of that, so culturally. So I think that's a very big plus. But on the flip side, I also see that some women who have it all, education, experience, supportive family members,
Which is very rare.
they are not as ambitious as I would like them to be. There is a kind of ennui, or maybe they want to do other things, why not? I call it the add-on card syndrome. So for us, our work, our career was our identity. There is that cultural change, that many of them are very, very happy doing other things, hobbies, and not necessarily pushing the barrier on the career, because without pushing, like she said, whatever she said, I mean, you push it at every stage, you don't reach the top. So, two cultural differences.
Thank you.
I also want to say one more thing. I have in this audience two people who are boomerangs. Okay? Paula and Anjali. Here, they're sitting right here. They both were very, very aggressive career women. And both took a back seat to bring up their children. And both have come back very aggressively. Paula works, I think, 12 hours, 7 days. And Anjali is the head of HR for NLS. So I'm so happy to see boomerangs. And I call them women boomerangs. But you have to have that patience for the returning women employee. Then they'll bring. So that's another thing.
I have one more question. So I recently went to a farming because me and my friend were planning to start a cafe, and we don't want to just open a cafe for a revenue purpose or fancy things, but we want to understand because we have that love for coffee. So we wanted to be educated, so we visited a couple of farms and understood the process of harvesting, cherry picking, and harvesting at the right season. What are the flowers, Arabica, Robusta, and still at an early stage. But what are your suggestions, ma'am, that when somebody wants to open a cafe, which they want to create a value into the society, what are your key suggestions for any upcoming people? What they need to address or they need to focus on?
I'm very happy to find that there's a person an entrepreneur who wants to set up a cafe. This is something that we have been doing for some time now, working with entrepreneurs. But I think the first point that I would like to tell you is knowledge. As I said, coffee is a living being. It's respiring. It's not a dead bean. So you really need to understand the bean. You need to understand, as you rightly said, I went to the farm. Yes, you see, firsthand how coffee is harvested, how it is processed. But you have to go beyond that. You have to understand the science behind it, the chemistry behind it. You don't realize that there's a lot of chemistry, there are a lot of chemical, ingredients which result in a great cup of coffee. So I would say do this postgraduate diploma course, which the Coffee Board offers. It's a good course. Do that course. You have a Kapi Shastra program where they tell you how to make a good cup of coffee. Come to my lab. We have a lot of these training programs. We have different levels. In fact, my level 3 is quite a hit. I only have 6 students, as I call them. They come from different parts of the world. And there's one person who comes every year when I hold it. And I get really very upset to see him. I asked him one day, "Aren't you trained?" He said, "No, I'm trained. But every time I come, I learn something new." So I said, "You're challenging me every time because I have to change the program because you're coming again." I have to go into a whole lot of, creating different practical exercises. We do a lot of practical exercises. We test your acuity. You have to understand the basic tastes of, the 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salt, bitter. We have umami now. It's a savory note. So I think you need to understand not only the process of, how to extricate the seed from the fruit, but you also need to understand the science and chemistry behind it. And I would be very happy. I think you should come into the cafe scenario.
Sure. Yeah,
it's a beautiful world to be in. And you have one more coffee grower sitting somewhere there.
That would be my preference.
Yeah, she has a brand called Varshini, and I'm so proud of that because it's a woman's coffee. She and her entire workers are women. And, I keep pushing her because her coffee can be something. And this year, she's done a very nice processing. And I just told her yesterday, the coffee is super duper this time. And she said, I was just waiting for your analysis. Because every year I'll tell her it's a bad coffee. You've done something wrong. You've done something, not very good. But I think as a woman entrepreneur, you should come into the cafe world. It's a beautiful world, very challenging, very competitive. But I believe that there is a place for everyone. You have so many cafes today, and every cafe is doing well. So understand the bean, learn about the bean, have the knowledge, overcome your system, your syndrome of fear, saying, will I succeed? You will succeed, as I said, if you have the belief that, you can do it.
But wait a minute, HR also has a lot of potential.
Yeah, they can fight.
So don't run away from HR.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sunalini. Thank you very much, Hema.
I have one last comment.
And now we'll have it's time.
No, I have one more comment, which is I've broken one more glass barrier today. I've been invited to speak at BIC. I must say thank you to Sadhana for that. I have really broken a glass barrier.
Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you all for staying on.